At this time, we would like to introduce to you an internationally known reading expert who is generously giving her time to us tonight so that we can learn about the latest science of reading, Dr. Jan Hasbrouck.
Thank you, and welcome everybody. This is very exciting. We're very happy to be here. We did create some handouts available for this and sent them out. If you didn't get them, let us know so that you can follow up in any way that you want to. Some of the things may be of interest to you that way. So, what I want to emphasize tonight, reminding us all, and myself included, that tonight we're going to talk about an overview of the science of reading. Okay, I was given 70 minutes for my section. We've used some of that already. So we're going to touch on some highlights. Leave you connected with the science of reading. For some of you, I'm sure that you're coming hoping that you have kept yourself current on this new emerging science and reading, and you can just leave patting yourself on the back that you're very up to date. For some of you, the effort that many of you made to get here, I hope there are some new learnings, some new resources, some new understandings that you will get out of this session. So let's just go ahead and get started. A little bit about myself. So some of you know me and some perhaps not. I live right here in Seattle, and I live here in this beautiful city in part because my son and my daughter and their kids live here in Seattle, so I'm happy to be here. My background in reading started quite a long time ago. I originally was a reading specialist and then reading coach. I did that for 15 years and then went on to work at the University of Oregon, then spent several years in Texas at Texas A&M University, working in always in some area, some capacity of reading. My specialty there was educational psychology, and doing research across the years. Some of you with a reading background may be familiar with this piece of work that my colleague here, there are geeks in the audience, that's right, cheer for norms. And Jerry and I updated our study in 2017, and this is our most current version of the study, how students perform when doing oral reading fluency. It's been helpful work for people. At this point in my career, I work independently, but with various publishers. My role, I feel, if I could articulate that, is to spend my time keeping current with reading research and helping translate that. Having started my career as a reading specialist and a reading coach, that is my goal always, is to make sure that my colleagues who are still in the classroom every day have access to the information they need to be the very best, most successful they can. So that's what I'm doing these days. I also want to shout out to my friends at Salmon Bay, where from time to time they generously let me volunteer there and work with kids. Happens to be the school where my grandson is in first grade, but you know, it's also a neighborhood school. And it is not at all irrelevant that I have a daughter with dyslexia. I know many of us go into the field of reading or get drawn to finding out more about reading because of issues within our own family or someone we're very close to. So my daughter has a very successful life. She persevered through school. She's almost turning 40, so she's behind past a lot of that academic stuff. But her struggles, her pain, her having to recover from the things that happened to her in instruction continues to motivate me these days as well. So this is why we're here. When I saw this, Amy helped me find this piece of artwork to represent why we're all here tonight. Why do you, at the end of the day, many of you work a long, full day, you have parenting responsibilities, all kinds of things, other things you could be doing. We're here to talk about reading and children who are reading. Well, this is what we want. This is our dream. I thought we'd start off aspirational, right? Instead of just talking about science. Why do we care about science? We care about science because this is the outcome. Children who are engaged and enjoying reading and relaxed about reading and can share reading with others and Hopefully they're learning from what they're reading and all the wonderful things. I want to acknowledge, I know these kids are models, right? But this is what we hope for, that all children are reading. So it's beautiful, it's easy, it happens effortlessly to all children, right? Of course, yeah, it doesn't. What the science is telling us, articulated by many different researchers, Marianne Wolf being one of the most profound, important, making contributions to reading research, and has such an articulate way of explaining what the findings are. Just in her most recent book, Read or Come Home, she made the statement that almost all researchers who are doing research in reading these days are saying very clearly, our brains were not wired to read. Our brains were not, we haven't evolved that far yet as human beings. There are many things that our brains do because we're born with that ability. Language, and unless you have some kind of impairment, language is natural. Learning to stand up, is that if any of you are parents of a 7 or 8 month, 9 month old, you don't have to teach them to stand up. They learn to stand up, and then they need to be taught how to sit back down because they get stuck that way. But we're never born to read, and we're not born to read. The more we look at reading, the more we're just flabbergasted that everybody does learn to read. It's a very complicated thing. I'm sure many of you are familiar with this infographic, we're calling them these days, of Hollis Scarborough's beautiful representation of the complexity of reading. There are aspects that come from the language that have to be in place, there are aspects that come from word recognition. All of them need to be in place, and then the instruction and the practice needs to happen to create that beautiful rope that is representative of skilled reading. This is another representative way of thinking about reading that some of you may have had contact with. It's been around. This theory, the simple view of reading, was posited back in 1986. Many people have taken a look at this way of conceptualizing reading and continue to find that they really took this very complex thing and talked about it in the most simple way. Basically, this formula saying reading comprehension is the product of decoding and language comprehension. Decoding being the ability to decode and recognize words, language comprehension, the ability to understand language. But it was explained as a theory as a multiplication, as a times product of knowing that both pieces have to be in place and both sides have to be strong in order for comprehension to happen. So if one side of the equation obviously being the decoding skill, and the other language, if the decoding skill is weak, even if the language comprehension is very strong, especially if it's so weak that we have to say it's basically a 0 in terms of competence in decoding, no matter how smart you are, how language proficient you are, what a good thinker you are, you're not going to be able to have reading and reading comprehension. Reading is going to be difficult. That is characteristic of many of the children we end up labeling as dyslexic or having decoding issues, or on that side of the equation. Our children who are learning to speak the language that we're teaching them to read sometimes have the low skill on the other side. So we may be doing a really good job of teaching them basic decoding or word recognition skills, but if their language isn't proficient, their reading comprehension is going to be affected. So this simple view is worthy of a lot of time and attention and discussion, so we understand how that works really well. But despite that, we've got all these kids who show up and we teach them to read and everything's beautiful, at least some of the time. I'm sure another reason that you are here is because somewhere along the line you have met a child like Noah. I'm using him as just an example today of those of our students who don't learn this thing that we are trying so hard to teach them. Noah I'm going to show you a piece of writing from him. At the time he wrote that, he was 18 years old. He was a senior in high school. He is dyslexic. So what I'm going to show you is a one-page, using with his permission, a journal he wrote in his high school language arts class every single day. All the kids did. And this day, his mother actually found this journal entry and shared it with in great frustration with some people. So his handwriting is very poor, his spelling is very poor, so if you want to read it out loud to you, please just follow along to hear a little bit more about Noah in his own words. Today I was so embarrassed in English that I never want to go to English class again. When you said you were going to pass out the paper back out, I knew it was going to be bad. I have unfinished learning around literacy. Say that to somebody, please. I have unfinished learning around literacy. So, this person is popping up. She's representing all of you here tonight because we don't have the facility or the time or the space really to do dialogue. So she's going to pop up every once in a while and ask questions that you probably want to ask. She's saying, why? Why do we have a national? If we know all this stuff, how come 1/3 of kids in our country, how come leaders are leading some of the largest school districts in this country and don't know this information? Why is this happening? Well, there are many reasons. There are many reasons. Some of the reasons are philosophical. There are people who look at the science and just can't fit it into their framework or philosophy, and so they discount science and hold on to philosophy, even when the result are children like Noah. That's one reason. Reading is very complex. Learning what it is and how to teach it in the classrooms is very complex. But another reason has to do with the science itself. And just recently I was reading one of my favorite journals, not a professional journal, but the New Yorker, and I found an article written by a physician who was talking just about this same thing, about how he didn't learn what he needed to know to be the best physician and learned it later. So I'll just read you quickly what he wrote. As a medical student, I was taught that peptic ulcers were often caused by stress. Treatments included bed rest and a soothing diet rich in milk. Anyone who suggested that ulcers were the result of bacterial infection would have been thought crazy. The prevailing view was that no bacteria could survive in the acidic environment of the stomach. But then, in 1982, 2 Australian researchers, who later won the Nobel Prize for their work, proposed that a bacteria was crucial in the onset of peptic ulcers. Although the hypothesis was met with widespread scorn, experimental evidence gradually became conclusive. Now, ulcers are routinely treated with antibiotics. Not bed rest, not milk. So, what we're doing in the reading arena is the same thing. I was taught things that I now know were the best science then, the best evidence, what we truly believed was true. I had to unlearn those things and learn new things. So part of this is that the evidence that we all need to be basing our work on is gradually becoming conclusive. And conclusive enough so that I can make this statement. And I'm happy to show the background evidence to this. I'm happy to show you evidence of schools that do have 90 to 95% of their kids reading at grade level, despite high poverty, despite lack of parental involvement, despite those things that we all sometimes use as excuses. We know that they're not. So how do they succeed? Students succeed when they receive instruction that is intensive, comprehensive, and high quality. And we all know it's definitely clear from the research that prevention is the best way to go. If we can find children early, and I don't know if you know the name Nadine Gabb, she's a researcher in Harvard. She is now doing research with 3- and 4-year-olds and saying we can identify those kids whose brains are functioning in a way that reading with good instruction is going to be relatively easy, and we can differentiate them with brains that reading instruction is going to be a little different with 3- and 4-year-olds. So we have more and more, it's emerging evidence right now, not convergent yet, so we're looking at where we might go with that. But this instruction, oh, and I also want to say, because I do have some colleagues and friends here who teach at middle school and perhaps beyond, it's never too late. Early prevention is always best, but we could take Noah and meet with him and give him the instruction that he should have had, and he can become a reader and a writer. It's never too late. But this instruction is provided by well-informed and well-supported teachers, and as I said, I'm going to keep, during my time, keep coming back and revisiting these things. The most powerful instruction has these characteristics: systematic, it's explicit, it's multimodal, some use the term multisensory, and it's intensive, and it's well designed to incorporate these features. We have to have, as you saw on that rope, you have to have oral language, you have to have phonemic awareness, phonics and decoding, fluency, vocabulary, and reading comprehension skills and strategies. That's it, that's my statement about research. So let's dig a little bit more into these things. First of all, talking about the instruction. Students succeed when they receive intensive, comprehensive, high-quality instruction. Prevention and early intervention is always best. Using these components: systematic, explicit, multimodal, and intensive. We throw these words around a lot, but we often don't take the time to explain them. So part of our exploration tonight is to talk about those things. Just recently, in the last couple of years, when maybe as a sort of a time saver, because the research has been so clear that systematic, explicit, intensive, and multimodality instruction is the best, there's been some people started to refer to that cluster of components as structured literacy. So when you hear that term, structured literacy, that's what it means: explicit, systematic, intensive, and multimodality. So if you got your handout sent to you, you have a copy of this. If you didn't, like we said, we'll make sure you get this. But this is an infographic that I saw maybe in the last year or so. I believe I encountered it on Twitter. I'm going to make that point too, because I have personally found, surprising to me, Twitter to be a major resource for my own professional development. But this ladder of reading, I think, is it's accurate, it's easy to interpret, and I think it resonates with most of us who have worked with students before. This notion that there are kids who come to us for instruction at different levels of ability is basically what this is saying. That there are children at the very top in that green area, estimated to be, when we talk about percentages of population, it's always a certain amount of estimate. But about 5% of students learn to read effortlessly. You may have had a child like that. Maybe you were one of those children. It's just those miracle children that around 3.5 and 4 just say, oh, don't read to me anymore, I'll just read this myself. The miracle of learning. There's another about 35% who it's almost effortless. A little bit of instruction and they're off to go. So, I'm not a math person, but if we add 5 and 35 together, that's 40% that the research is saying basically learn to read by themselves. Where are we in this country? 33%. So we're missing some kids, or I don't know. Let's call the next section orange. It kind of appears orange. 40 to 50% of kids are really going to have some difficulty with reading and writing if we don't give them good instruction. And then at the bottom, that number, we're still discussing it, but somewhere there's agreement, somewhere in the vicinity of 10 to 15% of children we may call dyslexic are going to have extraordinary difficulty, Noah being one example. One of millions and millions of our children who have difficulty learning to read and write without the most structured instruction. So what we've learned, this is science here. It's a cute little infographic. It's very friendly and warm and nice, but it is science. This thing that we are now calling structured literacy, or some of us are calling structured literacy, systematic, explicit, intensive, multimodality, these kids at the bottom really need that. If they don't get that, they're not going to be competent readers and writers. But and again, convergent research, all the researchers that are doing work in this area keep coming to that conclusion, so it's really something we should believe. But it's very interesting because some researchers have looked at when we use that kind of planful, structured instruction with our students in the green area for whom basically anything works. When we do structured literacy with them, they do even better. Good readers become great readers, and great readers, I don't know what happens to those kids. It's mind-boggling. So let's talk about what those components are. What do we mean by systematic instruction? It is not the sexiest thing we're going to talk about here tonight, because basically systematic instruction is scope and sequence, right? That's what it is. It's a plan. Systematic means there's a plan to your instruction. Everybody in this room, you know, when we talk about education, we talk about teaching, there's never enough time, there's never enough money, there's never enough people to do the work. So we've got to have a very careful plan. Somebody needs to make the decision about how much instructional time do we have, what's the order in which we should do these things. I guess order is actually part of sequence. What are the skills that a kindergartner needs to know? That gets them ready for first grade, second grade, those kind of plannings. So we usually think, and then this notion of start easier with foundational skills, move to harder, more applied skills. If there's possible confusions, let's separate them. Let's not introduce B, P, D, and Q on the same day. Let's give them a little bit of a break on that one. And then built-in frequent reviews, because some of those kids in the orange and the red, that's where they live. They get introduced to things and they review and review and review and review, and then comes the weekend and they start all over again, and we keep working on those things. I always think of systematic, that component of this 4-part process. This is the job of publishers. This is the job, we go get materials that have been beautifully and systematically designed. That makes our job easier. Teachers doing curriculum design in their spare time, after a day of teaching, without talking to teachers across the board, without being deeply informed about science, without being deeply informed about standards, it's just crazy making to me. So we do know, here's one of the things we know, you can't buy your way out of this problem. There isn't and bless our good friends at Socrates, Voyager Socrates, wonderful materials though make a difference. It's not though you can go buy any program, the best in the world, who knows whatever that is, by noon I would tell you, but that's not going to do it. But when we have a beautifully designed systematic program, then we can teach it explicitly. So here's where the teaching comes in. And you may have heard of these components before. Explicit instruction means that we do these 3 things with our students and it helps them to learn. First, we show them what it is we want them to learn. We tell them, we do a model, we do a demonstration. We don't make them spend precious time trying to figure it out by themselves. Then we spend some time doing guided practice, which means in this context, there's a teacher there, or a tutor there, or a skilled peer partner who can have them practice and do corrections. Basically, guided practice is where corrections, scaffolding, and encouraging feedback happen to our students. And the third step being that independent practice, which all of our students need. We need to see, can you do it on your own without me being there? If you cannot, we go back to, here's how you do it, let's do guided practice. You may have also heard these components referred to as I do, we do, and you do. The I do and the we do we often think about is in best practice as being in small group instruction, so that we can have kids that are about at the same level, we can demonstrate at the level they need, we can do that feedback and encouragement to them. The step that I added on the slide that flew by really quickly was there's a consideration now emerging from research, not necessarily instructional research, but educational psychology, how we as human beings learn. We learn best if we can talk about what we're learning, if we can have some social engagement. So a step between I do, we do, and you do is a third step that some of us are referring to as y'all do. Okay? That's you. After instruction, we put groups of kids together, and that doesn't have to be a homogeneous group. It can be a group of kids where we've got some kids who are very skillful in certain areas and not in others, and they can help each other. When I'm introducing the concept of y'all do a collaborative practice to schools, some teachers, administrators get a little concerned, well, if we leave them alone to work together, aren't they going to cheat? Yeah, so like, let's hope so, yeah. Let's hope they're spending time helping each other, giving each other feedback. You know, we don't want 5 kids to give their math sheet to one kid and she just does them all by herself. But we do this work and find that it's very, very effective, and across the grade levels. We often think of I do, we do, you do, y'all do at the early grades, but we know that these students have the same learning needs across the grades, and there are kids in the orange and the red zone across the grades, and we can do grouping, small grouping, collaborative practice, and independent practice across the grades. And so these are some examples of schools we've worked with, and you don't need special places for them. There's a high school in Georgia, this right here, these kids are doing collaborative practice out in the hallway. Active engagement, that intensity of practice, making sure that students have an opportunity to practice what they're learning. Minimum teacher talk. We just know that teachers just talking at kids is not the most productive component of this work. Some programs, some of you may be familiar with or even use programs that take care of minimizing or address minimizing teacher talk by using scripts. That's usually the purpose of having scripted instruction, is somebody has done the work to figure out what are the essential words that need to be said in the right order, so scripts can help make instruction very effective. But what we really want at the end is students doing things, actively engaged, that they are reading orally most of the time so that we know, A, they're doing it, and B, if they're not doing it correctly, we can give them some feedback. They're writing, they're spelling, they're encoding words, and they are talking, they're discussing, they're sharing, they're learning with and from each other. So this notion, a lot of this has to address the notion of multisensory or multimodality. They're writing, they're talking, they're doing all these things. There's a movement in the research field to move away from the term multisensory and begin to use more multimodality. And that is because, in part, how research has evolved. We've always known a lot of the programs, often designed to use with the most severely dyslexic kids like Noah, that a lot of those programs included things that we often labeled as multisensory, that the whole program worked, but we've now become more sophisticated to look at what are the components that work. So some of those programs I'm talking about had kids tracing sandpaper letters, or writing in the air, or writing in shaving cream, and those things were called multisensory and said that's what's working in this program. We now know that that was not what's working in the program. What was working is they had a systematic design, they had a scope and sequence that worked, they moved very systematically from hard to more difficult. There was lots and lots and lots of review, and kids were talking, they were looking, they were hearing, they were writing, and then they were doing all those things all over again. You can take out the things of the sandpaper writing, or the writing in sand, or writing in the air. That was part of an effective program, but that doesn't need to be part of it. But multimodality does. Kids learn best across the ladder from green to red if they have the opportunity to see it, hear it, say it, write it multiple times. So that's what we're talking about these days. And that sense of intensity. How do schools get anywhere close to 90 to 95% of their kids reading at grade level? There's a definite sense of urgency and intensity in the work that they're doing. No excuses. We're not going to blame the parents, like, we could do better if we had better kids. Well, they already sent us the best they have at home, They're not keeping the good ones at home. And focused instruction. This is a differentiator for sure with many of our schools. They have figured out, well, I'm going to say something I think is going to be very popular here. They have figured out that they need data to be effective. The best schools do. But they've also figured out what data to use. Most schools, here's the popular part, you may or may not agree, most schools I've worked with are collecting too much data. You can cheer, yes, you can cheer, you can shout. Too much data that overwhelms us, it's sometimes contradictory, There's all kinds of issues with too much data, but one of them is just the time that it takes to do it. What we know from the research that looks at the data part is to say, basically, we need data that answers 3 key questions. We know this from research. We need to know, especially at the earlier grades, who are the kids who might need help? That's the first question. Second question is, once I found a kid who might need help, question is, what kind of help do they need? Is it phonemic awareness? Is it fluency? Is it comprehension strategies? Is it the language side of the process? I want those answers as quickly, efficiently as possible. Then I start instruction. I'm doing the best I can. I go to these events, science of reading. I'm figuring it out as I go. I need to ask another very brave question. Is the work working? And I love it. It's basically we're talking about progress monitoring, but I love phrasing it that way. Is the work working? Because I'm working hard. I'm doing the best I can, but look at this kid, they're working hard too. Is our work working? We need to answer that question. So we're going to talk more about what that actually looks like. But here's another thing that we've learned, and we didn't need to come to an event on the science of reading to know this. The more challenges a student has, the more effective the instruction needs to be. So if we're talking, it's because we have kids who are, who need more, bring more challenges to the table for sure. But if we think about effective instruction being these components, I do, we do, you all do, and you do, which one of those should we be emphasizing? Which one of those should we do more of for our most challenging teacher? Our most challenging student. So turning to science, let's turn to science to try to answer all of our questions here tonight. Some of you probably somewhere along the line have heard something or read perhaps this article that Keith Stanovich wrote way back in 1986. That must have been quite a year. That was the year of the Simple View of Reading. Stanovich's article, The Matthew Effect, where he was referring to the book of Matthew and the statement basically that the rich get rich and the poor get poorer. He was referring to readers and made the statement that we knew back then that if kids are taught to decode, they do read more, and they can read and they do read more words. Through the act of reading, they develop a larger vocabulary. Through the act of reading, they become better comprehenders, and then they continue to read more, while their less skillful peers fall behind. So this gap, the rich readers get richer in their reading, and the poor readers get poorer, and they outpace their low-performing peers. He makes a statement in the article that the act of reading itself improves reading. Remember this, though, this was 1986, and we've done some work in the area of science, looking at brains and how brain works, and we would now change that statement a little bit that Keith made, because we have learned that this statement, practice makes perfect, is actually not true. And we know this by looking at the brain. If we practice something correctly, it's an improvement. If we practice something incorrectly, what we get is this. Practice makes permanent. This is why those of you who teach 4th grade and above, so many of your students come, when they write the word they write it as T-H-A-Y. Yes, they do. And you could see all kinds of evidence of spelling errors that Noah had, and they weren't even consistent. Sometimes he's spelling a word this way, and then he spells it a different way. He has practiced daily journal writing. He's 18 years old. Think of how much practice he's had. What's happened is it has made incorrect writing permanent in his brain, and that's much harder. This speaks to early prevention. It's just harder. So practice makes permanent. What we want for perfection is perfect practice makes permanent. So if we applied this back to Keith Stanovich's statement in 1986, we would now change that to say it this way. Because this is true now. Now we know this is true. It's not just the act of reading, it's the act of skillful, accurate reading that improves reading. So we could have lots of conversations about what this means implied for our practice. It implies coaching. If we're going to be good at what we do, we need somebody there to give us some feedback along the way so we learn how to do it real well. But I really wanted to talk about this and plant the seed of thinking about how this might affect your thinking around sustained silent reading and independent reading in your classroom, which erroneously has been stated as a scientifically supported best practice in the classroom. It is for some kids. The kids at the top, the green kids, Keith Stanovich said way back when, if those kids who can decode are allowed to decode, they will do it. They'll do it accurately, not perfectly, but reasonably accurately, so they're building those neurosynapses in the brains correctly. The kids in the orange and the red, when given the opportunity to, I don't know, write in a journal, like Noah is doing, or popcorn reading, or independent reading, it may not be the best use of our time. So when we look at these four components, it is very clearly the guided reading that makes the most difference, and it is the big differentiator. So when we think about differentiated instruction, this was a real hot topic just a few years ago. Everybody was going to workshops and reading books and articles about differentiated instruction, and do it this way, and here's how you have to do it, and you have to go to this workshop. Really, the key to differentiated instruction, if you think about the ladder with the green kids and the orange and the red, differentiated instruction, because they're clearly going to need different things, it boils down to this: the amount of high-quality guided practice that those students need. The kids at the top, you do a little demonstration, you have them practice at one time, they're ready for independent practice, and they will benefit from it. Or put them in a collaborative group, they'll continue to learn. The kids in the orange and the red, they need lots of guided practice, more guided practice. Try this. Yes, that's correct. Try this. That's not correct. Here's a correction. Try it again. That's really great. You're trying so hard. Let's do it again. Over and over and over in an age-appropriate way, in an encouraging way. It's the amount of high-quality guided practice that differentiates those kids in the green from those kids in the orange. So another part of our conversation today should be around powerful instruction. What does science say about that? It's amazing what our cognitive researchers are learning about this, including the work of Mark Seidenberg. Beginning readers, when you think back about the simple view of reading, he's saying most readers, he's making a very blunt statement here, beginning readers can already comprehend spoken language. Yeah, most of them can, we hope so, but some don't. But the fact is that that's one of the things that most of the students do bring to the table with them. They understand spoken language, so then we help them become able to read if they can just gain access to that language that's already in their brain through print. What has to happen is their task, as he says it, is to build a new circuit, linking the visual code in there that we are teaching them to the language that's already in their brain. He makes it sound so simple. All they have to do, isn't that what he says? Oh, their task, they will be able to read. If they can just gain access to print, that's all they have to do is create these new neural circuits in their system. They're building a neural circuit. He's not a teacher, he's a neuroscientist. He's saying that's their job. Their job is to build that neural circuit. I say that's our job, is to make sure that neural circuit gets developed accurately and correctly, and leads to what we want. So I'm sure many of you, because you're interested in the science of reading, you've seen some of these kinds of slides before. That's been happening just in the last 10 years or so, where cognitive psychologists, neuropsychologists, and others are having access to looking at how the brain actually functions in a way we never did before. And this is wildly informing our work and confirming much of what we thought we knew, and reminding us or disconfirming some of these things. So these are the kinds of studies that are just so encouraging, I think. This was a study, these are only 2 of the students in a much larger group of students, who over a very intensive 8 weeks of instruction received reading instruction well beyond anything we could provide in a regular classroom. It's very intensive. This is the kind of study we call a clinical study, because it's done not in a school setting. We have field studies or school-based studies. This is a clinical study. But they did 2 assessments with these children over the 8 weeks. At first, they gave them all a reading test and found out, yes, indeed, they're very poor, low-performing, struggling readers. Most of them had a label of dyslexia. They also took brain scans of these children engaged in literacy tasks before they did their intervention. And then afterwards, 8 weeks later, gave them a reading test and took a second scan of their brain. So in these instances here, we've got a 15-year-old who, before instruction, when the student is attempting to read, the activity is showing up in the right hemisphere. That's not where it should happen. Reading is a language-based process. It should happen in the left hemisphere, and that's one of the things that Nadine Gabb in her research at Harvard is confirming, that even at 3 years old, to use the correct hemisphere to process printed in
that nonsense words that they were reading?
I'm sorry?
MRI, were they reading nonsense words?
I don't remember what the task was. I do not remember what the task was. I think it was a variety test, but I don't remember what this slide represents. And a 10-year-old, the same basic kind of pattern. With more severe dyslexia, you see more activity in the right side, and it takes longer to get it transferred over to the left side. So this is a statement that Jack Fletcher, he's the first one I ever heard him say, a neuropsychologist working in Texas, who said, what teachers need to understand is that they are doing brain surgery by instruction. They are changing how these brains work, not the structure of the brain, but permanently changing the function of the brain. That's what powerful instruction does. Rewires the brain for language, for reading, for literacy activities. So all of this magical, wonderful stuff is going to be provided by somebody. It's going to be provided by teachers. And from the research, I interpreted it to mean not just teachers. We can't just call somebody, hey, let's hire you and call you a teacher. Two characteristics need to be in place. These teachers need to be both well-informed and well-supported. So there's our super teacher who's going to do all this wonderful work. What do we mean by well-informed? We mean they know the science of reading. They know what the science of good instruction looks like, and that's part of it. But they also need to have that data. That's very clear from the research as well, to answer those 3 questions I mentioned before. Who might need extra help? What kind of help would they need? And is the work working? So this outcome-based model, again, represented in your handout, so you can see this later. This is what is identified, noticed in the highly effective schools. This piece of this research comes from the research in highly effective schools, where researchers, I've done some of this work. It's fabulously fun work to do, because what you do is you go out and find a school that's already highly effective. It's not experimental, it's qualitative, it's explanatory. So you go find a highly effective school, one that has high poverty, high mobility, lack of parental involvement, all the challenges, and yet they've achieved 90 to 95%. What are they doing? So here are some of the patterns we see in those schools. One is they have a step-by-step process in place. They actively, vigorously, rigorously, with no excuses, go looking for kids who might even possibly be at risk. And the best schools do this as early as possible. So they're answering that question, who might need help? The next thing they do right away is determine what individual needs are. If you're on track and go, then you can get Tier 1 instruction. The best thing that we can do for our students is powerful Tier 1 instruction. If you do appear to need help, we've got to figure out what kind of help you need. Then we use those results to plan instruction. Then we implement the plan, we give our teachers the access to the materials that they need, and then along the way we're going to ask that important question of, is the work working? We monitor their progress, and if we find out that the student is not making the expected progress, we make some changes in the program. If they are making the expected progress, we continue the plan and we just keep going. So following some kind of systematic plan like this, so an outcomes-based model. We're going to pay attention to how our students are doing. We're going to actively be looking for the students who are struggling, and we're going to be willing to make changes and do things differently if it's not working as well as it should. So we need that information. That's a general way of talking about a well-informed teacher. What do we mean by a well-supported teacher? Well, the first thing on this list actually is a word I'm not very fond of. It happens to be a 4-letter word, so I'm not going to say it out loud. Why don't you? What's the first word up there? Time. Yeah, that's part of the support that we give our teachers. The other is the resources, talking about the curriculum materials. Materials make a difference. It's not the only thing. I said it already tonight. I say it many times. You can't buy your way out of this. You can't just put a kid in front of a computer or get a wonderful program and that's going to do it. We need all the other components as well. But when we have all the other components, a good tool, it's like the tool that a carpenter or a surgeon or anybody uses to do our work. And then we need to be sure that we're supporting our teachers through what we all need, if we're all accepting that notion that I accept that I have more to learn about literacy, ongoing, strategic, high-quality professional development, all those words being very important. It needs to be continued. It needs to be planful. I don't need lots of instruction on teaching math strategies if what I need to do is a better job of teaching phonemic awareness. So strategic and high quality. Okay, our discerning, skeptical professional educators back. Her question now is, okay, then what should we be teaching? The answer comes from science as well. When we look at the science of reading, it's pretty clear. This statement, and this I want to pause for just a minute. This statement made in 2017 by one researcher, but is being confirmed by many researchers. How do children learn to read? The answer is the same for all children. I'm pausing here for a moment to just let that sink in. Because to this day, when I'm in schools, I hear conversations and affirmation and heartfelt statements that, well, of course, all children learn differently. Of course, all children are unique and they bring unique things to the table. But the more we look at the brain, how the brain works, how the brain can, what we're calling reading, which we know what it is now, is neural connections to a symbolic system. Most of us use print. If you're blind, we use a braille, a tactile system. But you have to have some symbolic system. You have to link the language that's already in your brain to that symbolic system. That's what needs to happen. And it's the same process for every brain, whether it's a green brain, an orange brain, or a red brain. The answer is the same for all children. I'm really taking a lot of time to emphasize that because I think it's such new news for most of us. And not only new news, can you even believe it? Can you buy it? It's hard for me to wrap my head around it. He does go on to say, well, of course there are differences. There are cultural differences, economic differences, in educational circumstances that obviously affect children's progress. But, so I mean this latter is a good way of talking about that, but what they need to learn does not change. All learners learn best with model. I do, we do, y'all do, you do. All learners learn best if we give information to them in a particular sequence, if we get them physically, actively engaged through a multimodality and active engagement, intensive instruction. What they need to learn does not change. So what we've learned over the last 15, 20 years pretty strongly is we know what those components are. They don't change for children. They need to have oral language. That simple view of reading, you're never going to have reading comprehension or effortless reading if you don't have strong language. That has to be in place. We need phonemic awareness, phonics decoding, fluency, vocabulary, the strategies for reading comprehension. That's not where we're going to do our deep dive here tonight. Those are the things that we probably all are somewhat familiar with, but we need to keep working on those. Those are the components that Scarborough has so beautifully represented in her rope. This is another handout that we provided for you. I really like this. This came out of work being done in Arkansas. They have what is appearing to be a very successful focus on their work through a reading initiative that they're using RISE as the acronym for that. But they've taken some of these components like phonological awareness, phonics, fluency, and vocabulary across the top and put comprehension at the bottom, so it's arranged more, not just as each of these are equals and you do it in order. We do phonemic awareness, we do phonics, we do fluency, we do vocabulary, so that the outcome is deep, rich, effortless, comprehension. So take a look at this in your handouts, and that can be a benefit to you too. So here we're returning to our beautiful children, because this is the outcome, this is what we want for all of our students. And the components, some of the things I've talked about here tonight can help us move from where we are, 33%. A group of us met before this presentation today in my living room at my home, and including some folks who work in this field from Arizona who were not here tonight. But we had this conversation about, okay, 90 to 95%, we know it can be done, but very few schools are actually getting there. What if we just doubled what we're doing now? We're at 33%. What if we doubled that? And 66%. It's far less than we can do, but it's a wonderful, ambitious, and world-changing outcome if we could just get almost all children reading like that. So what should be our next steps? We don't want to just leave here with pictures of beautiful children and reading ropes and brain scans in our head. We've got to take some actual steps, right? We want to do something immediately. The first suggestion I'm going to make to you is really a strange one, or I would have never thought I'd be here saying this to you even 8 months ago. But I'm going to recommend that, oh, no, I forgot I put this slide in here. Remember, it's a no shame zone, and we have unfinished learning to do, so the next steps. The thing I'm surprised about is I am going to recommend that you get on Twitter. And 8 months ago or so, what I thought Twitter was, because I heard about it, but I'm like, I'm not going to do that, was it's where politicians get online and yell at each other and say disgusting stuff, and then there's, then it's a weird, bizarre place that I don't want to have anything to do with. I'm sure that part exists of Twitter. But what I've found is if you start to link with people, you start to, the Twitter word is follow. If you follow certain people, what you get in your Twitter feed, that's not a Twitter, you get this amazing stuff. So one of the things that you might start, because my Twitter is only about professional stuff, one way you might start is just following me, and you will immediately be connected with the people that I have quoted here today, who are doing the newest research, who are doing what's important to me, translating research into useful, helpful guides on the material. So I would strongly recommend that. We also, as part of the recommendations, as part of our handouts, made a little sheet of recommended resources, and there's a lot on here. So we highlighted 2 things. We did recommend that all of you who have not yet read David Kilpatrick's book, Equipped for Reading Success. It is a game changer of a book, and it's almost summer, so you could get a reading group going over the summer. And this one, it's complicated. It's challenging stuff. It works really well as a study group kind of thing. The other highlight on this handout is Emily Hanford's podcast. If you have not yet listened to, devote 50 minutes to listening. Another game-changing, perhaps life-changing, career-changing podcast. Why hard words, she called it, why kids aren't being taught to read. But maybe the most important thing I'm going to leave you with tonight, because my time is done, I'm going to say another next step we should all do, I already have, is to join the Reading League and follow what the next presenter is going to share with you, our amazing guest and sponsor of our session tonight, Dr. Maria Murray, who came to us from Syracuse, New York, to share about this group, the Reading League. Thank you.